Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku's home became a safe haven? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The rain was falling down heavily outside as Inko watched the news with her son. It was about a new and upcoming hero when the doorbell started to ring frantically. She quickly got up to answer it. Before her stood two soaked boys, one with red spiky hair and another with red and white split in the middle. Toya, Shudo. What are you doing here? Then she saw it. Across Shudo's face was a bandage and it looked like he had been crying. Auntie Inko, can we please come in? Toya looked up at her, terror clear in his eyes, and she snapped out of her daze before ushering them inside. She hurriedly got some towels, draping them around each of the boys. Izuku peeked from around the corner, curious about the new people standing by the front door. You two need a shower, I'll get you some clean clothes and new towels, hurry before you get a cold. Inko ushered them inside the bathroom, sighing as she watched the door close with sad eyes before hurrying to find something for the boys to dress in. Some old clothes that her husband left behind would fit Toya and Shudo would fit into Izuku's clothes. She grabbed a few towels before knocking on the bathroom door. Toya, I'm coming in. The shower was on and she could see their silhouettes before placing the things on the dryer, closing the door as she left. Who are they, Mom? Inko looked down at her son. He was staring at the now closed door before looking back at her. She knelt down to his height, giving him a weak smile. They are the sons to a very special person. If they are here then something really bad must have happened. She thought back on the bandage on Shudo's face. That man was definitely behind this and she couldn't stand it. Let's go make some tea, so they can warm up. Izuku nodded and followed his mother, sitting by the table as she got to make the tea. You see, Izuku, when I was younger I had this really close friend called Rei, but one day she was forced into a marriage with a very evil man. No matter how much she would like to, swearing in front of her son wouldn't set a good example. After that, I only got to see her a few times a year up until she had her youngest, Shudo. I told Toya, just before Shudo was born, that if they ever felt like they needed to run somewhere, they could always come here. She took down some mugs, taking out Izuku's favorite All Might mug as well. Them being here now, it means something bad happened. Izuku bit his lower lip, frowning at the table and thinking of the younger boy's expression. Shudo-kun can use my All Might mug, maybe he'll feel better? Because All Might always makes me feel better. Inko smiled at her son's reasoning, nodding as she placed the mugs on the table, taking out sugar and honey. They heard the bathroom door open. Two newly washed boys stepped into the kitchen, both looking tired but more relaxed. Tea is ready, please, sit down so we can talk. Inko gestured to the chairs opposite her and Izuku, who was blowing at the steaming hot tea. Toya nodded and helped Shudo onto the chair, who looked at the All Might mug in wonder before grabbing it. Toya sat in front of Inko, taking a big gulp of the tea. They sat quietly for a minute before Toya felt like he could speak up. He sent Mom to a mental hospital. He hit her and he pushed her into hurting Shudo, and I just couldn't stand by, couldn't just watch on as he drove a wedge between us. He was crying again, seeing his red hair as his body shook. Inko leaned forward and took his hands, stopping him from pulling at it. I knew the others would be fine, so I took Shudo and ran. This was the only safe place I could think of. I can't let Shudo go back there. You know what he will do. He gripped Inko's hands, holding them tightly as his whole being shook, tears falling as heavy as the rain outside. Tunisan, Shudo put a hand on Toya's arm, his gray eyes shining with tears. Toya hugged him close to his chest, stroking his hair just the way their mom did. Mom, don't send them back to the bad man. Inko looked at her soon-to-be 5-year-old. He was crying too. She had already made up her mind, but this only fueled her decision more. Toya, Shudo, you're not going back there, and I'll do my best to try and get your siblings out of there as well. Trust me when I say that no one is going to hurt you anymore. Toya looked at her with grateful eyes, but his eyes went back to Shudo's as he felt the boy pull away. His eyes fell upon Izuku, who was holding out his hand toward Shudo. I'll show you my room, let's play. Shudo's eye lit up, taking his hand and let him lead the way. Inko smiled after them before taking place next to Toya, hugging him close in a motherly embrace. That's when she heard a harsh knock on the front door, feeling Toya freeze in her arms. "Stay here, I'll send him away," she whispered to him before going to open the door. Before her stood a very angry-looking Todoroki Enji. "Todoroki-san, what a unpleasant surprise to see you here." She glanced at the clock that hung above the kitchen door. "At 9 in the evening, what can I do for you?" He just stared at her. "Tell my sons to come out or I'll come in and drag them out myself." Toya froze. He knew his father couldn't see him, but he really didn't want to cause trouble for Auntie Inko. "I'm sorry, Todoroki-san, but I haven't seen your boys. Last I saw them was over 5 years ago." He gruffed and started to make his way in but was quickly blocked by Inko, her eyes burning. "Unless you have any other business here, I'm afraid I can't let you in. My son have just gone to bed, so if you do not leave right now, I'll have to call the cops." Enji stared at her and she stared back, her eyes unwavering. "I'll come back," he rumbled as he left, hearing the door slam shut and the lock click into place. He studied the house a bit longer before turning and leaving. "I hope you don't," Inko mutters under her breath, locking and bolting the door before walking back into the kitchen, seeing a hunched-up Toya. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, startling him before he hugged her tightly. This wasn't going to be easy and she knew that, but she will not let that man torment these children any longer. "Mom, can Shochan stay in my room tonight? I'll keep him safe," Izuku proudly said, holding the other boy's hand who looked a little flustered. "I think it'll do Shudo some good," Toya smiled, patting his brother on the head, and Inko nodded, making Izuku beam at her. "Just make sure to brush your teeth, there are extra toothbrushes under the sink." Inko watched them as they left the room. "He's going to make a fine hero someday," Toya mused, happy to see that Shudo finally had someone to play with. He looked back at Inko, her expression dark, and tears formed in her eyes. "Auntie Inko." He stood next to her, making sure she wasn't hurt anywhere. "Izuku. Izuku is quirkless, we found out not too long ago," she rubbed her eyes, thinking back to the heartbreak her son had experienced. Toya's eyes widened slightly, before taking on a saddened expression. "But I'll be here for him no matter what, even if he wants to try out for you. When he's 15, I'll always support his dreams if they may seem far away." The morning soon came. Inko woke up in her bed. She had insisted that Toya should sleep in it, but he turned her down and took the couch. She checked into Izuku's room. The boys were holding hands in their sleep and Izuku had given Shudo his All Might plush. She checked on Toya, who was sleeping soundly on the couch, the blanket laying half on the floor by now. She made her way into the kitchen, picking up her phone to make a silent phone call to one of her older friends who worked within the police department. It rang a few times before a man picked up. "Naomasa, it's me, Inko, I need your help." "Inko, what can I do for you?" Tsukachi Naomasa smiled softly. Inko had been like an older sister to him as they grew up. Even if they didn't talk too much by now, he would still consider them as close as family. But he had not expected the words that came out of her mouth, a deep frown on his face, and his gut wrenched as she started to sob into the phone. "Naomasa, I need your help. It's about Endeavor's children. They need to get away from that man." Although it was quite common for people to accuse pros for doing bad things, and most wasn't even true, but this was Inko and she had never once lied to him. "I'll be over there within the hour, I just need to tell Tsuragami-san that I will be out." He quickly hung up, talking to his chief before stepping out, bumping into none other than All Might. "Heading out, I see, a villain on the loose?" He beamed, looking down at his friend who gave a short nod. "I believe so, I have a house call actually." He walked past All Might, knowing he would follow him, which he did. He explained the phone call he had just gotten, believing every word that Inko had relied to him as All Might just silently listened. They rounded a corner and got into one of the police cars, driving in utter silence as Naomasa was thinking everything through. "Are you sure you want to join in on this? You sort of just followed me." He spoke as they were almost there. "If it is as serious as you think it is, then I'll come and make sure they are safe in the house." Naomasa only nodded, parking in front of the house. He knocked on the door a few times before speaking. "Inko, it's me, Naomasa." The door quickly opened, and a green blur threw herself into his arms, making him stumble backwards. "Easy there, it's good to see you too." He hugged her back, looking over her shoulder to see two young boys and a boy that looked to be a teenager. but they were staring at the man behind him. He doesn't blame them as it's not every day you see the #1 hero so up close. It's so good to finally see you again. Last time was before I had Izuku, she released him, studying his face before her eyes drifted to the man beside him. He smiled as her mouth just hung open. You'll catch flies like that? He teased lightly, and she snapped out of her daze. You didn't say you were bringing a hero, but do come in. The boys and I were just having breakfast. She ushered them inside and into the kitchen, handing them each a coffee cup. She eyed the boys, still standing the hallway completely starstruck. Toya, sweetie, Naomasa is here to help. Would you please tell him the whole story? She snapped the boys out of their daze. Toya studied her with a worried look, but she gave him a reassuring smile. It's All Might. Izuku beamed up at the man. Both he and Shudo had stars in their eyes, and it gave her an idea. Izuku-kun, why don't you and Shudo show him your room? I'm sure he would be flattered. The boys looked at each other before nodding, each grabbing All Might's hand and lead him towards Izuku's, now also Shudo's, room, both talking over each other. Now Toya, if you would place your hand on top of mine, we'll begin. Inko and Toya sat across from Naomasa. Toya looked at Inko for reassurance, which he got, before placing his hand on top of Naomasa's. Now, begin from the start. The very first or just from last night? He put a recorder on the table. It was easier than taking notes. The very first, if you could. Toya took a deep breath before he went into it, how their father had bought their mother and brought her into a quirk marriage, how he abused their mother and how it got worse when Shudo was born. He told him about how Shudo got the scar and how their father had sent their mother to a mental hospital. After he had told him everything, he was once more crying into Inko's shoulder, who was holding him close. Naomasa sat in silence. Who would have thought that someone as beloved as Endeavor was actually a total piece of shit and treated his family so poorly? Toya, sweetie, why don't you go and play with the boys so I can talk to Naomasa? We'll eat something after, okay? She wiped away his tears, smiling at him, and he nodded. Once he left, All Might stepped in, looking like he was deep in thought. I guess Shudo and Izuku told you about yesterday? Inko asked politely, and All Might nodded, sitting next to Naomasa. So, what do you want to do? The boys are currently taking refuge here since you are the closest thing to a family they have. Naomasa studied as she looked at the table before meeting his eyes. I want to take all of them in, up until Fumi is 18 where she can decide what they should do, or until we can get Rei out of that mental hospital. But up until then I want them as far away from that man as possible, and I want Rei to be in my care as well, or he'll use her against them. The policeman nodded, writing her statement down. All Might, are you all right? You appear to be steaming. Inko's word drew Naomasa's attention, but it was too late. A puff of smoke covered the room, and before her sat a man that looked a lot like All Might but slightly shorter and less muscular. They sat in silence before Inko let out a small giggle, both of them looking at her. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but it was such a shock. It must be tiring to be in that form all the time. She smiled gently at All Might, who gave a small blush. Inko dash. I won't tell anyone, don't worry about me. She smiled at Naomasa, who smiled in return, giving an affirmative nod. They soon packed up after talking a little bit longer, and Naomasa promised he would dig deeper into Endeavor, just in case the evidence on young Shudo's face and the recording wasn't enough. He would need a statement from their mother as well, maybe even have her give him permission to remove the children from Endeavor's care and into Inko's as a foster parent. To think that someone like Endeavor could do all of this, to his own family nonetheless. Yagi Toshinori frowned as they entered the police car, watching as Naomasa pulled out his phone to make a new call. He watched as he talked on the phone before hanging up, smiling to himself. Did something good happen? Naomasa nodded as they made their way back towards the station. I got a little help from a certain underground hero to keep them safe. I'm going to have to write an official report stating that the boys will be in Inko's care from now on as the investigation is in full bloom. There was a clear goal here, and Yagi wanted to help out as much as possible. He thought back to how young Shudo had looked when he told him about Endeavor and what he had done to their mother. He also thought back to young Izuku, who seemed to be very smart for someone his age. His quirk notes were amazing, and he left his heart clench when he learned that the boy was quirkless. They reached the station and Naomasa went straight to work, quickly typing up an official email where it states that Todoroki Toya and Todoroki Shudo will be in the care of Midoriya Inko until they can settle the investigation. He called the hospital where Todoroki Rei had been admitted and booked a time to meet her this afternoon. The faster they could get a statement, the better. "I'm here to speak to Todoroki Rei. I have an appointment." The receptionist looked it up before pressing a button. Not long after came a nurse who escorted him to Todoroki Rei's room. He knocked on it before he pushed it open, his eyes falling upon a female with snow-white hair and gray eyes. "Hello, my name is Tsukachi Naomasa. I'm a detective from the police department." He closed the door behind him and taking a seat opposite her. He could see that she had been crying as well as a couple of fading bruise marks on her arms. "I'm here because one of your son, Todoroki Toya, has made a statement that their father has been abusing you and your youngest son." Her eyes filled with tears and she lunged at him, crying into his chest. "I hurt him. I hurt Shudo. I didn't mean to, but I just couldn't stand it. I'm sorry, Shudo, I'm so sorry." She frantically cried, tightening her grip on his jacket, and he slowly stroked her back. "I'm also here to inform you that young Todoroki Toya and Todoroki Shudo is currently in the care of Midoriya Inko, who has also made a statement against Todoroki Enji." She looked up at him with surprised eyes before smiling. "I can also say that Midoriya is fighting to get both you and the children in her care, but that won't be possible without your statement, so if you would." He took out a recorder, placing it on the night table next to them. He held her hand as she told him everything, confirming what Todoroki Toya had said earlier that day and as well granting him permission to remove the children from Endeavor's care during the investigation. "I thank you for your time. With all this information, I'm sure that Midoriya will win the case and set all of you free, but you didn't hear that from me." Todoroki Rei smiled and nodded, thank her lucky star that she had such a good friend out there. She prayed that nothing bad would fall upon them and that her husband would keep away during the investigation. Aizawa Shoda, also known as Pro Hero Eraserhead, put away his phone with a sigh and dragging the attention to himself. His co-workers studied him in hopes that he would tell without them trying to force it out of him, but when he didn't say anything, Present Mike took it upon himself to make him speak. "So, what was that about?" Aizawa glanced over at him before releasing another sigh. "I've got a mission to protect a family called Midoriya. Apparently a father to 4 kids have been abusive to the youngest and the mother. I'm to watch over them every night until the investigation is over." He finished what he was doing before getting up, dialing the number to Mrs. Midoriya to explain the situation. "Oh dear, did they say who the father was?" Midnight piped up, looking worried that such a man was wandering the streets. "No, he did not spec." "Oh, good evening, Mrs. Midoriya. This is Pro Hero Eraserhead. I just wanted to inform you that I will be watching over you during the investigation so that you and the boys are safe." He left the staff room and made his way towards the Midoriya household. Todoroki Enji was fuming, boiling with rage as he read the email for the 3rd time. How dare his brat of a son do this? He knew Shoto would never dare to go against him, cursing Toya under his breath before turning his attention to the other name. "Midoriya?" he growled under his breath. He knew he should have got his wife's ties with her once they got married. But when he had read that Rei had made a statement against him as well, that just broke his boiling point, he would win in the end. He always did, but that didn't mean this was any less frustrating. Fumi and Natsuo peeked into their father's study. If he saw them, they knew he would lash out on them, but after hearing multiple things break, they had to check it out. Fumi slowly made them back away, ushering Natsuo into the living room. "I believe Toya and Shoto are at Auntie Inko's place. At least they are safe." Unlike Natsuo, who had only met Inko once, Fumi had met Inko multiple times and couldn't help but to smile. They were safe and that was all that matters. Aizawa knocked on the front door of the Midoriya household, holding his breath. Why? He wouldn't be able to answer that. The door slowly opened, and his eyes met with a pair of green eyes. "Oh, you must be Eraserhead." Izuku squirmed past his mother's legs to look up at the hero with wide eyes, shining with wonder and admirations. Aizawa looked down at the boy with green fluffy hair before looking at his mother, who was giggling quietly to herself. "I'm sorry, my son just loves heroes and I'm sure he knows all of them." Aizawa nodded before kneeling down, patting Izuku on the head before his eyes drifted to behind the two of them, spotting 2 other children. one the same age as the boy before him and another that looked to just have turned 13. But what drew his attention most was the bandage over the younger boy's face, and felt a sickening feeling rise up within him. That's Shochan and Tunisen. Their father is a bad man, but I'll protect them. Izuku ran over to them, taking the boy he called Shoshan's hand, and smiled brightly at him. Shoto clung to Izuku, eyeing the man in the doorway as Izuku told him everything about Eraserhead. Would you like to come in for a bit? But Aizawa declined, saying that he'll be just within shouting distance of the house, patrolling amongst the rooftops. Aizawa sat on the roof of a neighboring house, watching the empty streets below as the hours ticked by. He thought back to the boys that had been staying back. They looked oddly familiar, but he couldn't place their faces to a name, so he'd let it go for now. But then his mind drifted to the boy with fluffy green hair, how his eyes had shone and how he had proclaimed that he was going to protect the two boys from the bad man. Aizawa snorted. Someday he would make a great hero if he kept it up. The night went by without any problem, except that Aizawa was extremely tired, but when wasn't he? Eraserhead. The young boy from yesterday yelled out the open front door and he couldn't ignore him, landing in front of him. Mom wonders if you want breakfast? He was about to turn the offer down, but the look in the young boy's eyes was too much, and he gave a small nod. The boy led him into the kitchen where the other two boys sat. The tiredness had not entirely left their eyes. Eraserheadson, I'm so glad you could join us. Mrs. Midoriya smiled kindly at him. Coffee or tea? Coffee, if you wouldn't mind. She nodded and handed him a cup of steaming coffee, pointing to a seat where he could sit down. Mom. The young boy tugged at his mother's skirt, making her bend down. Yes, Izuku? He whispered something into her ear, and she nodded before he hurried back to the table. She placed an all-might mug before the multicolored-haired boy and one with flowers in front of Izuku, a sweet smell coming from them. I can drink this. The multicolored-haired boy spoke up, looking unsure at Mrs. Midoriya, who looked at him with a slightly stunned expression. She kneeled next to his chair, stroking his hair with a kind smile. Of course, you can, sweetie, just be careful since it's hot. His eyes went from her back to the mug as he slowly lifted the mug to his lips. His eyes lit up only to fill with tears, but he didn't stop drinking until the mug was half empty. Shoto, Toya murmured, pulling his younger brother into a hug. The smaller boy sniffed and Inko rubbed his back. It's just like Mom's. He spoke softly into his brother's chest, trying to wipe away the tears as he hiccuped. Izuku jumped down from his chair and went over to them, putting his hand on Shoto's back next to his mother's. It's okay, Shoto, you'll see her again soon, Toya promised, and Shoto nodded, sitting back into his chair. Aizawa looked at them and he felt horrible. How could someone hurt such innocent young kids, whoever it was needed to be locked away? They ate breakfast in peace, the two youngest occasionally talking about heroes and what they wanted to do in the future. Aizawa didn't know why, but he wanted to see them in his class once they were ready. He also hoped to see the oldest as well. Eraserhead, can you sign my notebook? Izuku held out a notebook. On the open pages was a drawing of him and a detailed analysis of his quirk and scarf. He bent down and read the page, surprised by how well written and correct it was. He nodded and accepted the pen Izuku gave him, borrowing the book to write his signature underneath the drawing. I'll see you tonight, he mumbled, ruffling Izuku's hair, who ran over to watch the news with Shoto and Toya. Eraserheadson, can I talk with you for a second? Aizawa nodded and they went outside, standing in the rising sun. Is there a possibility that you could take Izuku and Shoto to daycare tomorrow? On your way home? I'd go myself, but if he showed up... She didn't dare to finish that thought, a frown forming on her face. I don't mind, as long as you inform the daycare. He nodded, glancing into the apartment, seeing the three boys watching TV whilst talking. Great, now I just need someone to pick them up, but that should be an easy fix, I hope. She smiled brightly at him as she bid him goodbye. Instead of heading home, he went straight to Yude. Maybe he could talk to the principal about this situation. He was sure the animal would be willing to help, especially if he found out that a boy genius was involved. He entered the staff room. It was empty, of course, but he knew that the principal would already be there as he knocked on the door. Come in. Aizawa pushed the door open and stepped inside, laying eyes on the white mammal. Ah, Aizawa, do come in, sit. have a cup of tea. The principal looked at him with curious eyes as Aizawa stood in front of him, clearing his throat. I have a few things I want to discuss with you. The animal nodded and Aizawa started his lengthy explanation and story that was currently happening at the Midoriya household. Izuku, Shoto, it's time to wake up, Inko spoke lightly, pulling the boys back from dreamland. Mom, good morning. Izuku sat up and rubbed his eyes, smiling at her, before turning his attention to Shoto, who sat up next to him. Good morning, Shon. Shoto let out a small sound, acknowledging him as he tried to rub the sleep from his own eyes. Inko laughed quietly. They were almost complete opposite, but maybe that's a good thing. Inko put out some clothes for them before heading back to the kitchen to finish making breakfast. Not long after came the two boys, holding hands as Shoto was still half asleep. Is Sho-chan coming to daycare with me? They sat next to each other. Shoto once again had the all-might mug. She knew Izuku would insist on it. That's right, I've told your teachers that he'll be going with you from now on and Eraserhead-san will pick you up and walk you. Izuku cheered as a sleepy Toya made his way into the kitchen, yawing and stretching before plopping down on a chair opposite of the kids. Inko stroked his spiky yet soft hair, placing a warm mug of tea in front of him. Eraserhead. Izuku cheered, making his mother give him a weary smile, placing the breakfast in front of them. What will I be doing? Should I go to school or? Inko shook her head, giving him a knowing look, and he nodded. If he were to leave, his father would most likely hunt him down and use him as bait to get Shoto back. They both knew that Enji would do anything to get Shoto back. Shoto being protected by a pro to and from school, as well during all the hours when he's home, made it safe for him to go outside, and besides, Izuku would stay home if Shoto did. I think it's better if you stay home for a bit, Inko smiled. Home? Shoto spoke up quietly, his eyes widen in slight fear, but before any of the two could say anything, Izuku piped up. Yes, this is your home, that's what Mom says. The fear was instantly gone from his eyes, shining with realization as a tiny smile spread across his lips. That's right, but once your mother and other siblings joins us here, we're going to need for something bigger. Inko placed a finger on her chin, thinking about where would be the best place to move, somewhere with a big garden so all the kids could play and Ray to relax. The doorbell rang, shaking everyone from their thoughts. Mrs. Midoriya, are the boys ready? Everyone let out a sigh of relief as Inko went to open the door, almost feeling shocked when she saw a small animal on Eraserhead's shoulder. This is the principal of Yuta. Hi, Nizu. He came to meet the boys. Nizu jumped down, bowing his head slightly as a greeting. Oh, do come in. She glanced at the clock. You're early, is this the reason why? That's correct. The principal was adamant that he needed to meet the boys, so I had to bring him. No offense, Eraserhead-san, but what is the principal of Yuta doing with you? Inko watched as Nizu approached the boys, studying their faces with a serious expression. I work as a teacher there, was the simple answer, and Inko nodded. Mrs. Midoriya, can I talk with you in private for a second? Inko looked surprised and nodded, telling Eraserhead to help himself to a coffee before stepping into the hall with the principal. Those two boys, are they perhaps the sons of Endeavor? Inko looked down at the ground, her eyes hard and sad, but she nodded nonetheless. I've heard from Aizawa about your situation and I'm glad he came to me. If it's true the things that have happened them, then they need protection 24/7. Knowing who the father is, Inko could only nod. She knew what the principal was telling her is true. She wished she could give the boys the protection they needed. Fret not, Mrs. Midoriya, that part have already been taken care of. As from today on, a hero or sidekick will always be by your side. Aizawa will take the two young ones to daycare and another will escort them home. Inko fell to her knees, feeling so thankful that there were so many good heroes out there willing to help. There's also another thing that we need to discuss. You see, Aizawa told me about your son's notebook, noting that he seemed very accurate. Oh yes, Izuku does exceptionally well for someone his age. The teachers sometimes have a hard time to keep up with him. She could see the curiosity spark in his eyes and his tail twitched lightly. If you wouldn't mind me leaving a small test for young Izuku, I'm curious to how well he'll do. She nodded, glad that someone other than her noticing how brilliant Izuku's mind is, but she frowned slightly. I must tell you, If you're interested to see if Izuku has an intelligence quirk, then I'll have to tell you that my son is quirkless. The small interest she had seen in his eyes seemed to burst into flames, but she were mostly glad that he seemed interested in him even if he didn't have a quirk. Even more of a reason I want to test him. If he does well, I might take to teaching him. Izuku and Shoto were walking hand in hand in front of Aizawa, talking to themselves as Aizawa thought back to the conversation he had with Nizu just last night and the excited reactions of his co-workers when they found out they were going to look after 2 5-year-olds. They soon reached the daycare and Aizawa crouched down next to them, pulling their attention. Today, Pro Hero Present Mike will pick you up and IRT you back home, you understand? He watched as Izuku's eyes lit up with excitement and at Shoto, who looked a bit confused but nodded anyway. He must have deemed that if Izuku likes them then they are okay. Don't cause any trouble now. He ruffled their hair, sending them off to go and play amongst the other kids. He glanced around him and spotting a few of Ectoplasm's clones. At least they would be safe during the day like this. This must be Shoto. It's nice to meet you. Izuku, why don't you show him around, so he knows where to find everything? Izuku nodded, standing tall as he showed Shoto around, not noticing a pair of red eyes glaring at them from a short distance. Come on Shochan, I'll show you my favorite spot. Izuku led Shoto by the hand, pointing towards a huddle of trees on the opposite side of the playground. But before they could make it halfway over there, a boy with blonde spiky hair stepped in front of them. Oi da! Izuku froze and Shoto could feel him tense up, almost seeing him shiver as the blonde boy stared down at him. Hello Kaken, Izuku greeted, trying not to take a step back, because if he did he would walk right into Shoto, who was half glaring at the boy in front of Izuku. Red eyes turned to him, staring him down before his eyes moved to a fresh bandage. Inko had changed it this morning. Who are you? The boy called Kaken half growled and Shoto did not like his tone. I'm Shoto, a friend of Izuku. Who are you? He huffed, glare growing even deeper. I'm Katsuki. Why would you want to be a friend of Deku's? He's useless, Katsuki smirked, eyeing Izuku as he flinched a bit. Izuku is not useless. Shoto stepped in front of his friend, glaring at Katsuki full on now. He's quirkless, that means he can't do anything, therefore he's useless. If Izuku hadn't moved to hold him back, Shoto would have lunged at Katsuki for saying something so false. So what if he doesn't have a quirk? He doesn't need one to be the best person ever. Katsuki let out a laugh, a sneer on his face that Shoto wanted to remove so badly. He should give up on becoming a hero. A quirkless loser like him would never make it. Izuku is already a hero. He's my hero. Shoto burst out, feeling someone clasp his right hand, and he looked over at a teary-eyed Izuku. Shoto let him pull him away from Katsuki and over to his favorite spot. You shouldn't use your quirk, you can get in trouble. Izuku spoke softly, opening his hands to show Shoto his own right now. It was almost completely covered in frost. Does he say those things often? Was all Shoto could ask. Izuku looked down with saddened eyes before nodding. Shoto's stomach churned and he felt his anger rise up again, wanting to storm over to Katsuki and give him a piece of his mind. He's right, thought, someone like me. I could never be a hero. Izuku sniffled. He had heard those words over and over again ever since he found out he didn't have a quirk. He's wrong, you're going to become the best hero out there, I know it. Izuku looked up to meet his eyes, tears still falling as he studied Shoto's face. When you said I was your hero, did you mean it? Shoto grabbed both of Izuku's hands, staring deep into his green eyes. Yes, you showed me kindness, sharing your everything with me, let me sleep next to you and hugged me when scary dreams came. Shoto leaned his forehead against Izuku's, trying to show him how much he meant every word. But I'm a Deku, I'm useless, he sobbed softly, not removing his eyes from Shoto, who softly smiled. Deku doesn't mean useless, it stands for Daycare, which mean you can do it. For once in his life, Izuku really liked the nickname Deku, especially when it came from Shoto. They spent the rest of the day glued together, and every time Katsuki tired to get near Izuku, Shoto went into defense mode and glared at him until he turned away. Yo, little listeners, I'm here to bring you home. Izuku and Shoto stared at the pro hero before them in wonder, and Present Mike had to hold back a squeal. They were just so darn cute. Ready to go. He smiled at them as they nodded, making their way towards the Midoriya residence. Izuku asking him all types of questions about his job and his quirk, getting more excited by every question answered, and Present Mike was more than happy to answer all of them. It wasn't long until they reached the house, Present Mike feeling a little sad that he had to part way with them already. They were just so adorable. "Oh, you must be Present Mike. Do come in, would you like a cup of coffee? It's the least I can do as a thanks." Present Mike delightfully accepted the offer, being led inside by Mrs. Midoriya. "Present Mike, can you sign my notebook?" The green-haired little listener named Izuku held up an open notebook. On one side were a drawing of him, and on the other was a well-made analysis of his quirk and what it could be good for. He gladly signed the notebook, making Izuku squeal in happiness. "Izuku-kun, Principal Nizu left you a test sheet." Inko didn't need to say anything else as Izuku sat by the kitchen table, already filling out the test with a curious Shoto and Toya next to him. Inko giggled as she handed Present Mike the cup of coffee, who was also looking with interest at what Izuku were doing. "Done." He giggled not even 10 minutes later, holding the paper up to his mother, who took it. It was a test for second graders, 2 whole years ahead of his normal studying. Present Mike looked impressed as he looked at the paper. If you took away the few misspellings with was overall correct. "How about I take it with me? I need to head back to you, anyway." Present Mike smiled as Mrs. Midoriya thanked him. He bid the family goodbye and headed over to the school, knocking on the principal's office before entering. "Here's the test you gave the little listener, a few misspellings but overall very well made." Nizu studied it with interest, only finding one thing to be wrong. He thought about it, made second grade test wouldn't cut it, he needed something more challenging. Izuku and Shoto was curled up next to each other as they watched the news, cheering as the villain once again was caught by a pro hero, this time by a fairly new hero that was drawing the attention of many. "One day, we'll be the ones to stop bad guys," Izuku mumbled, his eyes drifting close as he felt Shoto nod, snuggling closer for the comforting warmth. "We'll make an amazing hero team," Shoto mumbled, and Izuku giggled happily, holding on to Shoto's hand as they fell asleep in front of the TV. He let out a silent prayer to whomever was listening that he and Shoto would be together forever. Naomasa sighs, running his fingers through his hair. As he stared at his computer, he's been gathering evidence for hours upon end and he still didn't feel any closer to a complete case. There was a knock at his office door, making him look up as he saw Toshinori peeking in. "What's the matter?" he asked as he sat up straighter, his eyes following Toshinori as the man sat down before putting a small file in front of him. "What's this?" He picked up the file, flipping it open to be met with charming purple eyes of a young boy around the same age of Izuku and Shoto. He looked up at Toshinori with confused eyes, hoping the other would explain. "Earlier today I saved a small orphanage just outside of town. When I asked all the kids if they were all right, I spotted a boy with purple hair. He wore a muzzle." Naomasa's eyes widened as he started to read through the file, his eyes growing wider and wider as he kept reading. The boy was muzzled due to his quirk, how the staff was afraid since the boy didn't know how to properly use it and his parents had abandoned him at their doorstep once he had got it. His stomach gave a jolting lurch as he looked at some of them photos and he had turned his head away. The young child had bruises all over him when the orphanage had first taken him in and luckily not sustained any more injuries since he had gotten there. "A muzzle, that's so barbaric, he's just a child." Naomasa raised his voice slightly, glad that only Toshinori could hear him. "I was thinking, maybe Mrs. Midoriya would like to take a look at the file. She's already taking on the Todoroki family, so maybe." Naomasa hated to agree, but he did. Inko would be a perfect mother for the young boy, but she already had so much on her plate with protecting the boys. "It wouldn't hurt to ask," Toshinori interrupted his thoughts, making him look up and study his old friend's face before nodding. "I'll give her a call, at least I'll give her the option of thinking about it." Naomasa rummaged for his phone, his messy desk. The phone that hung in the kitchen rang, making Toya jump ever so slightly. Inko, who was washing dishes, wiped her hands before picking it up, wondering who was calling during lunchtime. "Midoriya residence." Midoriya. Inko speaking. There were the sound of shuffling papers before a voice spoke up. "Inko, it's Naomasa." Her face relaxed as she warmly greeted him. Naomasa, what can I do for you? How's the case going? Toya peeked into the kitchen, the work that Nizu had gotten him now completely forgotten. Yes, the progress is slow but it's going forward, but that wasn't the reason for this call. No. Inko titled her head in confusion. I got a case file here, now you are allowed to say no, but it's about this young boy. Stop beating around the bush, she huffed. Naomasa usually did this when he wanted to ask a bit of a selfish favor. There's this boy who lives at an orphanage a bit outside of the town. He's forced to wear a muzzle due to his quirk, and I was wondering if you could take a look. I understand that you're busy with the to-do. I'll do it, I'll take the boy in. Naomasa was quite on the other side before letting out a soft chuckle. Yeah, I knew you would. 2 days later, Inko and All Might, who was in his smaller form, went to the orphanage together, leaving present Mike and Eraserhead in charge of the boys. Inko was mumbling softly under her breath as they took All Might's car. The adoption process upon the trail was going to be a lot to handle, but she was always down for a challenge. Mrs. Midoriya, we're here. Her gaze snaps to All Might, slowly turning to look at the orphanage before her. It was huge and gothic looking, almost as if it had stood there for 1,000 years. She stepped out of the car, taking in the sight before her eyes landed on a woman standing by the big doors. All Might put one of his hands on the small of her back, grabbing her attention. She nodded and they made their way towards the lady. Mr. and Mrs. Midoriya? She asked kindly, making the two of them blush, trying to stutter out an explanation. Oh no, Yagi and I are just friends. Inko finally got out, almost stumbling over her words, and the woman's face went a bit red. Oh, please excuse me. You can call me Hayama, if you'd like to follow me. All of them went inside. Inko looked around to see that it was fairly modern and looked clean. Who are you here to meet today? Or are you just taking a look? Hayama asked sweetly, looking back at the two. I'm here to have a meeting with Kitsumi-sen. She looked stunned before leading them to the head office. On the door stood Kitsumi Kaya, and Hayama knocked on the door before opening it. Kitsumi-sen, there are 2 people here to see you. She led Inko and All Might inside. Behind the desk sat a strict-looking woman, who gestured towards the chairs in front of her desk. Hayama closed the door behind them. All that could be heard was the clock ticking by. What can I help you with today? I see there's an appointment under name of Midoriya. I suppose that's the 2 of you. Oh, no, just me. Yagi here is just a friend. Kitsumi looked at them with unimpressed eyes, tapping away at her computer. The question still stands, what could Kitsumi's orphanage help you with? Inko sat up a bit straighter. She had no doubt that this was the woman who had put the muzzle on the young boy. I'm here because I want to meet Hitoshi Shinso. She stopped her typing at once, turning slowly towards Inko, looking as if Inko had offended her mother. Mrs. Midoriya, believe me when I say that we have better-suited children. She spoke as if she had something unpleasant in her mouth. Believe me when I say that I intend on adopting Hitoshi Shinso if he wants me to. Kitsumi stared at Inko with her beady eyes, pressing a button on a comm next her. Hayama, please escort these 2 to the playroom. They want to meet Hitoshi Shinso. Hayama entered the room, ushering the 2 of them out of the office and towards the playroom. Shinso was sitting by himself in the corner. The muzzle was almost too tight this day, making his jaws hurt, but he knew better than to cry. So, there he sat, playing with the toy car and wishing he could be anywhere else. The door to the room opened and he saw Mississippi Hayama and 2 adults enter the room. He felt sadness well up inside him. Yet another kid would go to a new home and was going to stay here, alone and forgotten. He stopped playing when he felt a presence kneel down beside him, making him look up into kind green eyes who looked a little sad. Hello there, Hitoshi-kun. I'm Midoriya Inko. If you'd let me, I would like to take that off. He looked up at her with wide eyes but didn't move, not even when she went to take off the muzzle. Once it was off, she threw it across the floor, smiling down at him. There, much better. She cupped his cheeks, running her thumbs over the red marks that dug into his skin for far too long. Hitoshi-kun, if you'd like, you can come and live with me and my son? It's a little cramped right now, but I'm sure we can make it work. Shinso looked up at her with wonder, but he didn't dare speak up, knowing she'd change her mind if she knew about his quirk. Hitoshi-kun, it's all right, I already know and it's not your fault, trust me. Tears formed in Shinse's eyes as he let out a small sniffle. She pulled him into a tight hug, letting him cling to her. "So, do you want to come with me?" All he could do was nod as he sobbed into her embrace. Inko picked up the small child, holding him close, feeling him tremble in her arms. She stroked his back, murmuring soft and gentle things in hopes that he would calm down, but she knew that there would only be one way for him to do so. She strode out of the playroom, Yagi following swiftly behind her with a faint smile on his lips, watching the child clutch to her. They entered Kitsumi's office and Inko glared down at the woman. "Now Mrs. Midoriya, it is very but Inko cut her off. "What is unprofessional is putting a muzzle on such a young child. Giving the excuse of him not being able to control his quirk is bullshit and you should know that. I will not let my child stay here any longer. You can send me the papers and forms to my address. And if you do not agree, just wait until the media and the heroes hears about this. I will personally march into All Might's office and have him come here." Yagi put a hand on her shoulder, and she quitted down, hugging Hitoshi closer to her, marching out of the office. "You'll have to forgive her, she's quite protective when it comes to children." Yagi bowed his head slightly before hurrying after her. He knew the orphanage wouldn't dare go up against her, the way they had reacted told him as much. He watched Inko talk to Hitoshi in front of his car. The boy had finally calmed down and a soft smile was upon his lips. As he got closer, he could hear what they were saying. "Oh, and you're going to have a brother too. His name is Izuku and he's going to love you." Inko smiled, making Hitoshi's eyes shine with wonder. "You want to be a Midoriya, right? I don't want to force you. You can keep your last name if you like." But Hitoshi shook his head. "I want to be a Midoriya too." And Yagi could see Inko's heart melt, hugging him closer to her. "Shall we go back? I'm sure young Izuku and Shudo would like to meet young Hitoshi." Inko strapped Hitoshi in the back seat, taking her own seat in the front and taking out her phone. "Midoriya residence, Aizawa speaking. Aizawa-san, we're on our way back. We have Hitoshi with us as well, but don't tell the kids as it'll be a surprise." Inko giggled as she heard Aizawa groan something about, "Not another kid to melt heroes' hearts. We'll be home in about an hour. Make sure that present mice doesn't feed them too many sweets or spoil them too much." Once they had hung up, she put the phone to her ear again. "Naomasa? Yeah, we went." She listened for a bit before looking a bit sheepish. "Actually, he's in the car with us." Yagi flinched as he could hear a loud clattering in the background. He could practically see him fall out of the chair. I sort of threat them with media coverage and pro-hero All Might," she giggled nervously, undoubtedly getting a schooling. Yagi glanced into the rearview mirror, watching as Hitoshi excitedly looked out the window, staring at the trees as they quickly passed by. He knew Inko had done the right thing. Even if the way that she did it wasn't the best, it was for the best for the boy's mental health. About an hour later they parked in front of the Midoriya household. Inko helped Hitoshi out, holding his hand as they walked up to the front door. "Ready to see your new home?" "Well, at least until we find a bigger place." Hitoshi looked nervous but nodded, tightly squeezing her hand, but she smiled softly at him. Yagi ruffled through his hair, letting him know that both of them were there for him. Inko gently swung the door open, announcing their arrival, and they heard people scramble their way. First Izuku with Shuto, then Toya, who was quickly followed by Present Mike, a female she hadn't met, and Aizawa. Inko's eyes fell on Izuku as he looked at the boy next to her. She kneeled down. "Izuku, this is Hitoshi, he's going to be your new brother." Izuku lit up and held out his hand towards the other. "Nice to meet you, let's be brother best friends forever." Hitoshi looked at his hand before shyly taking it, before being pulled into a hug. It was just like Inko's hugs, warm and safe. Hitoshi knew he would like it here. He knew he would be safe with this family. "I'm sorry for barging in, but when these two said that they were going to babysit two adorable little kids, I just couldn't stay away." The female approached Inko as she watched Izuku and Shuto drag Hitoshi into the living room. "My name is Kayama Namuri, also known as Pro-Hero Midnight," Inko gasped before she let out a soft laugh. "I thought you looked familiar. My name is Midoriya Inko." The shook hand, before she suggested they all stay for dinner as a thanks, even if it would be a bit cramped. They gladly accepted. Even Aizawa couldn't say no to 3 pleading seats of eyes, especially the ones of Hitoshi. Their small dinner soon turned into a small welcome party for Hitoshi, who looked bashful and decided to hide behind his new brother. It was slowly becoming too much and Aizawa had to step outside, taking a deep breath of air as he watched the stars slowly lit up. It was peaceful, but soon that peace was interrupted by a ringing phone and he looked at the screen. For a second, he thought about not picking up, but if he ignored it, it would only get worse. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes and answered. "Hello, father. I told you to call me dad. Are you really that stupid? And you're a teacher." He could hear his father sigh, but he chooses to not answer. "I didn't raise you to become a teacher. You really are lazy. You didn't raise me at all, at least," that's what he wanted to say. "I trained you to become a pro, not to look after snot-eating children." Aizawa wanted to crush his phone, something to make his father stop talking. "I am a pro," he said through gritted teeth, but his father just scoffed. "Then why aren't you in the news? Don't lie to me, boy, it'll only get worse if you do." Aizawa was about to shout at him when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked to see Inko's face. She looked worried and her eyes asked him if he was okay. He wasn't. "I gave up so much to have you, to make you into the perfect hero, and you treat me like this? Like it meant nothing." Tears stung in Aizawa's eyes and his shoulders started to shake. 22 years of this, it was finally pushing him over the edge, and it didn't help when Inko lovingly hugged him, stroking his hair. "Your mother didn't die to see you become a teacher. If you don't become a recognized hero, her death will be in vain. Stop, please just stop." He hugged Inko tighter, tears now freely running down his face. "You're pathetic, Shoyuta. Your mother would be absolutely disappointed in how you turned out." The phone went dead and he knew that his father had hung up, but he didn't care. All he could do was cling to Inko as she tried to soothe him. They stood like that for what felt like hours before she pulled back to look at him, wiping away his tears, her eyes swimming with worry. Did you hear?" His voice was coarse and small. He tried to avoid her eyes, but it was impossible as her eyes held so much comfort. "Just after you declared that you're a pro." He sniffed and nodded, biting his bottom lip. Do you wish to talk about it?" "You don't have to, of course, but you might feel better." Aizawa was quiet for a while before nodding. Inko smiled softly, opening the front door. "Aizawa and I are going for a little walk, Yagi-san. Can you make sure the kids don't stay up late?" "Will do." She closed the door, turning to Aizawa, looping her arm in his as they start walking. They walk in silence for a while. Aizawa calming down enough that he wasn't crying anymore, and he took a deep breath. "In the beginning, we were just a normal family. My mother, she was an amazing pro hero, but she died to a villain when I was only 7. That's when it all began, the abusive behavior, that is. Father was never in my life before Mom died, but that didn't bother me since I had her. He brutally trained me, much like Endeavor to Shudo. He pushed and expected perfection. Every time I said I couldn't do it, he would say how it was my fault that Mother died, how I made her weak, and if I didn't become a pro hero she would be disappointed in me." Inko wanted to rip Aizawa's dad's head off. Seemed to her that she need to rid 2 people now and she would gladly do so. "When I graduated UA, I finally moved out, but it never ended, and if I ignored his phone calls he would come to my apartment, threatening me, tearing into me and making sure I knew my place." Tears was rolling down his face again. He felt Inko pull him into a tight hug, whispering soothingly as she stroked his hair. "Aizawa, you listen to me and you listen good." She cupped his cheek, looking deep into his onyx eyes. "I know I can't erase your past, but I'll be dead if I don't make your future brighter. You are an amazing teacher and a wonderful hero. Nothing he says will take that away, and I will support you no matter what." All he could do was listen, but she wasn't done yet. "Everyone back at the house? They adore you. Izuku loves you because you're a true hero and your friends? They need you as much as you need them. Back in the apartment, you have a family that loves and adores you. Even if we just met recently, you've already become a part of the family." Aizawa hugged her tightly, hiding his face in the crook of her neck. "Your mother would be so proud over the person you've become, believe me." And he did. He believed her, and he knew he would always believe her. Inko stood by the sink, finishing up the last dishes. Almost everyone had gone home by now and the boys had fallen quiet, almost scarily so. She wiped her hands on a towel before looking into the living room, having to stifle a giggle upon laying her eyes on the couch. Aizawa was laying face down with Toya pressed to the back and the kids laying all around them. They looked peaceful and content, like a big pile of brothers having a cuddle fest, and it was the cutest thing Inko had seen in a long time. She quickly snapped a photo, sending it to Yamada and Kayama. She covered them with a blanket, moving the smaller boys around a bit so they wouldn't fall face first of the couch. Toya blinked up at her tiredly before snuggling into Aizawa, falling into a deep sleep once more. Inko studied Aizawa's face a bit closer. He had a scar on the right side of his forehead and the rings under his eyes were dark. She had no doubt that the scar was from his father, and those dark rings, they bothered her a bit. She strokes the hair out of his face, seeing him relax into her touch, making her smile. Before heading to bed, Inko snapped another photo of the boys, deciding to print it out and put it on the fridge. She knew that once everyone was here, everything would be all right. She turned off the lights in the living room, getting to her own room to sleep, staring at the ceiling as she slowly drifted into a peaceful, yet dreamless sleep. Aizawa woke up the next morning, teetering in the edge of falling of the couch. He rubbed his eyes and turned around, seeing 3 children being wedged between him and Toya. He thought back to what Inko had said the day before, blushing slightly as he watched Hitoshi snuggle closer to him. Footsteps made him turn his head, his onyx eyes meeting shining grass-green ones, who was smiling at him. "Good morning, did you sleep well?" Inko spoke softly, hoping to not wake the other boys, and Aizawa nodded. "Seems like the rings under your eyes have faded a bit, that's good." Inko sighed softly, making her way into the kitchen to start with breakfast. Aizawa slowly made his way off the couch and into the kitchen. The clock on the wall showed it was a little bit before 7, at least he wasn't going to be late for work. "Mitter." "Inko is fine," she swiftly cut him off with a smile. He nodded and cleared his throat. "Inko-san, I was thinking, maybe I can take the boys to UA with me? If you wouldn't mind." Inko looked surprised before giving him a teasing smile. "Did Izuku ask you to bring them?" Aizawa looked away but nodded, but he quickly added, "Also, Principal Nizu would like to meet Izuku and Toya as well, and the other teachers would love to meet Shudo and Hitoshi." He trailed off. He felt flustered as he had just referred to them by their first names. Had he really grown this close to them in such a short time? "I'm fine with it, I need to go grocery shopping, it's starting to get empty in here." Inko nodded her head to the fridge and Aizawa smiled ever so slightly. "We get to go with Ni-san to school?" Izuku exclaimed into his bowl of cereal, nearly giving Aizawa a heart attack when he was called Ni-san in such an excited voice. "That's right, once you're done with breakfast." Inko smiled sweetly at her son, who looked ready to explode with excitement. "Is it really okay?" Toya piped up from the other end of the table, helping Hitoshi with some orange juice. "Yes, Principal Nizu would like to speak to you and is Midoriya-kun, so there won't be a problem." Everyone decided to ignore Aizawa's slip-up, but Izuku's eyes did shine a little brighter. "Whoa!" 3 boys looked in awe of the big school. They all carried passes that Aizawa had brought with him. Their eyes roamed the school's halls as they made their ways towards the staff room and principal's office. Izuku was walking in the middle, Shudo to his right and Hitoshi to his left. They walked hand in hand as they took in the big school, and Toya was right behind them. Aizawa opened the door only to be pushed to the side, Yamada and Kayama cooing at the 3 young boys who smiled at them. "Midoriya, Todoroki, let's go to the principal's office." Toya looked down at his brother, who gave him a nod, even if he seemed to be reluctant of letting go Izuku's hand, but eventually did. Aizawa entered the office with the 2 boys in tow, hearing how the other teachers cooed and awed over the other 2 boys that stuck close to Yamada and Kayama. "Ah, Todoroki and Midoriya. Just the people I wanted to see." Nizu looked up from his paperwork, studying the 2 boys in front of him. He went into an explanation on how he wanted Izuku to be his personal student and how he wanted Toya to come here and study, getting him ready for the entrance exam and hoping to enroll him a year early, if he did well. Both boys seemed confused but excited about the idea, and it was decided the 2 of them would come 3 times a week to study and train. "Toya, Izuku, got your lunch boxes? Shudo, did you find your shirt? Hitoshi, you can bring that toast with you." Inko ran around, helping the boys find and fix everything before one of the pro heroes came to pick them up. "Moom, I can't find my All Might pen." Izuku's voice rung from his room, that he now shared with Shudo and Hitoshi. "Didn't you pack it yesterday?" It was quite before she heard running feet coming towards her. "Found it." Izuku waved his favorite pen around. She had finally gotten all the boys to the front door, dressed and well-fed, just in time for the door to ring. "All Might." Three young boys' eyes sparkled when Inko opened the door, revealing All Might in his full glory, beaming down at them. "No need to fear, for I am here," he said loudly and gave a hearty laugh. "Oh my, I didn't know that you would come by. The boys are going to daycare and you—" Inko placed her hand on her cheek, looking slightly confused at the sudden appearance. "I am here to see them. Principal Nizu is expecting me." Before they left, Inko insisted that All Might took a toast with him, hearing that he hadn't had breakfast. "We are here to leave Shudo and Hitoshi at daycare." They had arrived at the daycare, Shudo and Hitoshi sitting on either side of All Might's shoulders, and Izuku was getting a piggyback ride from Toya. When the other kids spotted All Might, they quickly surrounded him, their eyes big and sparkling. Katsuki was looking on, standing a bit farther away, his eyes looking for Izuku. He spotted him on the back of a red-headed boy, and he looked really happy as he waved goodbye to Half and Half. He could feel his anger rise. "Will Shochan and Toshikin be okay?" Izuku asked, leaning his head on Toya's shoulder to see better. "They'll be all right as long as they have each other, I'm sure of it," Toya reassured, nuzzling his cheek against Izuku, who in turn giggled. They soon reached UA, and even thought Izuku had already been there once before, he was still excited to see all the students. Talking about students, they were all staring at them, while they were staring at All Might. "All Might, I think you're dragging too much attention. I think we'll be SW-." But he couldn't finish his sentence as a swarm of students surrounded All Might. Toya sighed, shaking his head in annoyance before heading towards the gates of UA. They had gotten their own cards in order to pass the gates safely. Izuku was looking behind him to see All Might getting smaller and smaller the closer to the front doors that they got. Normally he would feel scared, but he had Toya and Aizawa was inside, so he knew he would be fine even without All Might around. Toya knocked on the staff door. A shuffling could be heard from inside before the door slid open and Aizawa came into view. He looked annoyed until he noticed it was only the boys. His expression went from annoyed to confused back to annoyed in seconds, which was quite impressive. "I thought All Might would see you here," he huffed, leading the boys inside. "He did until he got swarmed by the front gate. I'm sure he'll be here so dash." For the second time in less than 10 minutes he was cut off by a swarm, the teachers now standing around him as they cooed at a starstruck Izuku, so he couldn't really blame them. After 10 minutes of heroes playing and talking to Izuku, All Might walked in, looking quite flustered as he straightened his yellow suit. "I'm sorry I'm late." The students were quite excited. He looked up to see Toya talk to Aizawa, and Izuku was being lifted into the air by Present Mike. "Now that we are all here, let's get started." Everyone startled a little as they heard Nizu speak up, turning their attention towards him. He motioned for Toya, Izuku and All Might to follow him into his office. "While Midoriya is studying with me, you and another hero will look after Todoroki's education and training." Nizu patted Izuku on the head, watching as the child drew on a piece of paper. "During the mornings you will have normal classes, you will send lunch in here with Izuku, and afternoon classes you will train with All Might." Toya nodded. "Just one question, who is my other teacher?" "She should be here any minute now." "Man, that flight was so long, I really tired my wings out." A female with shoulder-length white hair sighed, stretching her large soft blue wings, a pair of custom-made noise-canceling headphones around her neck. Her large silver eyes scanned the large building in front of her. She knew she was late, but having to fly all the way from America wasn't an easy thing. "All right, let's go," she said cheerfully, pumping her fist before entering the school. "Sorry I'm late." The door to the principal's office slid open with force as a cheery voice called out, making 3 out of 4 jump. "Miss Winchester, how was your flight?" Nizu spoke softly, a stark difference to the other's loud and cheery tone. "Long and no service, I couldn't even listen to my music," she giggled. now taking time to look around the room and studying them up and down before her eyes landed on Toya. You must be Toya-chan, nice to meet you. I'm Angel. Izuku piped up, his eyes as big as tea saucers and a bright smile. That's correct, little one. She winked, pointing at him in a dramatic way. My name is Angel of the Wind, but you can call me Arya-sensei. Arya's morning lessons was, in a short word, interesting. Toya wasn't even sure if he was learning anything, but she held his attention like no other teacher could. Arya-sensei, how old are you? I just turned 22, she hummed, writing down a new math equation. Toya just stared at her with wide eyes. She was an adult, yet she acted close to a hyperactive child, maybe like a golden retriever. Toya-chan, pay attention or I'm gonna hold you during lunch. She pouted at him and decided that yes, he should pay attention. Nizu watched over Izuku, who was sitting quietly, filling in the test he was given. It was a final exam test for 5th years and so far, he only needed help with around 4 questions. Nizu sipped on his tea, thinking of the boy's future. He was indeed brilliant. Maybe it was a waste for him to become a hero and not something within science. I'm done. He smiled brightly and handed Nizu the finished test, who he took gratefully to grade it, and Izuku went back to drawing. Brilliant indeed. Toya sighed as he put down his pen, hearing the bell go off to signal lunch. Done with the paper? Arya-sensei walked over to him, slightly leaning over to look over his English papers. She quickly looked it over before pointing at a word. This is misspelt. It's supposed to be there, but you've spelt it there, but otherwise it's really good. She ruffled his hair as he changed his answer. Come on, let's go for lunch. She cheered, taking his finished paper, and they made their way towards the staff room. Tunai-san. Izuku cheered as they walked into the principal's office. He had already started with his lunch, and Toya quickly followed suit. God, they are so adorable, Arya mused, taking a photo of the two of them eating before turning to Nizu. Everything went well, I presume. It was more of a statement rather than a question, making Arya nod with a bright smile. Great, you're free to leave but be on time on Wednesday. She sent him a peace sign before ruffling Toya on the head, leaving them to eat. Shudo and Hitoshi had spent the entire day by each other's side, quietly playing as they found it comfortable, not needing to constantly communicate with each other. They had just finished enjoying Midoriya's lunch and packed it away when they got approached by a sour-looking child, drawing their attention to them. Why were you with All Might this morning? Bakugo Katsuki grumbled at them, making Hitoshi hide slightly behind Shudo, who was glaring at Bakugo. Why does it matter? Shudo coldly answered, making Bakugo growl lowly. Why isn't Deku here? Hitoshi looked confused, never having heard of someone by the name of Deku. Don't call him that. Hitoshi's eyes fell onto Shudo's clenched fists, frost starting to cover one of them. Lunch was soon over, much to Toya's dismay. He helped Izuku pack away his empty lunchbox before packing away his own. I am here to train young Todoroki. All Might burst into the room, making Toya drop his box with a loud clatter. I wish he'd stop doing that. Toya sighed as Izuku giggled, enjoying the antics of his favorite hero. Come along, we have a lot to go through. Toya followed All Might, borrowing a UA gym uniform as they made their way into one of the training rooms. It took an hour to go through the basics as well as safety precautions, but they eventually got to it. Toya had to start with a simple warm-up before trying to spar against a training dummy. Even if he had gotten basic training from Endeavor, it would be better to start over from the beginning. You're doing great, young Todoroki. Remember to keep your legs straight. All Might encouraged as Toya tired to do a sweep kick. They kept at it until the clock reached 3 before giving it a rest for the day. After a shower, he walked into the staff room to pick up Izuku. Today it was Aizawa skirting them back home, picking up the other 2 boys as well. When they reached the daycare, Aizawa was greeted by a sour-looking Todoroki and a slightly shaken Shinso. Todoroki had some scuff marks, signaling that he had been in a fight, and it seems like he wasn't the only one to pick up on that as Izuku hurried over to the 2 of them. Sho-chan, Toshikin, what happened? He looked at them with worry, noticing the bandage around Shudo's head was slightly loose as well. A mean person was saying mean things about someone. Hitoshi piped up, fidgeting where he stood. Did you fight with Kaken? Shudo didn't meet his eyes, confirming his suspicions, and he grabbed Shudo's hands. You shouldn't fight, Sho-chan, only protect. Shudo pouted and pulled Izuku closer to him, still not meeting his eyes. You weren't here so I protected you. Bakugo is a meanie and shouldn't say bad things about you. Izuku beamed at him. He couldn't be made with him after hearing that. Aizawa looked on in silence, Toya picking up Hitoshi in hopes he could stop the boy from shaking. Alright, let's get going before Mrs. Midoriya starts wonder where we are. He got the attention of the two boys and they started to make their way home. He watched as the two walked hand in hand, talking about the day they had had and how Hitoshi was half asleep in Toya's arms. He had an odd feeling in his stomach, but he oddly liked it as well. He felt content and, dare he say, happy? Arya Winchester better picture can be found on my DeviantArt. How long has it been since they've been outside? Natsuo couldn't even count the days on both his hands anymore, maybe if he used his toes, but ever since Toya and Shudo ran away their father had not let him and his sister out of the house. It was safe to say that he was starting to get bored. The courtyard in the middle of the house wasn't cutting it anymore, and now that his brothers weren't here anymore it was dull and quiet. The TV that blasted the news wasn't even amusing anymore, even if he loved heroes just as much as Shudo. Natsu, he looked up from the TV, his sister was next to him, her eyes fill with concern as she glanced around. What's up, Yumi? She fidgeted next to him, making him reach for the remote to turn off the TV. Don't. Leave it on. Yumi. What's going on? Natsuo studied his sister carefully, now she's got him worried. She fidgeted a bit, biting her lip before leaning close to whisper to him. Let's run away, to Auntie Inko. Good morning. I'm here to pick up the little ones. Was the first thing that burst through when Inko opened the door. In front of her stood a woman with white hair and silver eyes, angel wings draped over her back and a halo with daisies sprouting from it. Arya-sensei. Toya came to look at who it was, surprised to see her here. Toya, you know her? Inko looked back and forth, not sure what to think. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm pro-hero Angel, but you can call me Arya. She beamed at Inko. Since I'll be teaching Toya every morning, Principal Nizu said that I have morning duty from now on. She giggled lightly as Inko finally seemed to calm down. Of course it was pro-hero standing in front of her. Angel. Izuku ran towards her, arms outstretched out and wanting to be picked up by the shining hero. Arya hugged the small boy as she saw two other boys peek out of the kitchen. The way towards the kindergarten was filled with Izuku's questions. He wanted to know everything about being a pro-hero from another country. What was hero schools like? Izuku practically bunny hopped around her. I actually went to you, she giggled at the cute kid. What? Really? Toya looked up in surprise, holding both Shudo's and Hitoshi's hand. Of course, it's one of the best hero schools in the world, so I took the chance when I got it. Izuku's eyes seemed to sparkle at that, seeming more determined. Does that mean you know any pros from here? It was Hitoshi that spoke this time. His eyes were filled with wonder. I do, some that you might now even, she smiled kindly towards the shy boy. Who? Shudo peeked up at her from behind her brother. Well, I know Present Mike, Midnight and Eraserhead, we were all in the same class. The younger boys looked at her in awe before she got bombarded with questions about how the pro-heroes was like in their younger years. Alright boys. Be sure to behave today. Aizawa will be picking you up after Toya's classes are finished. She crouched down in front of the two boys. She studied Shudo's face, seeing the small scratches and bruise. Hold on. She reached out to her wings and took off one of the feathers before placing it on Shudo's forehead. A faint blue glow emitted from it as Arya mumbled a few words. The scratches and bruises vanished before reappearing on Arya before vanishing completely. There, good as new, she smiled. What did you do? Toya squeezed Shudo's cheeks, looking in disbelief before turning to Arya. My quirk lets me heal people by taking their pain. By using this feather I can take on smaller number of bruises, but when it comes to bigger things, she looked a bit sad, before smiling brightly and ruffling the two boys' hair before standing up. We'll be late, hurry along now. Katsuki looked from afar. Just like yesterday, Izuku was walking away with a winged lady and that red-headed Weirdo. He watched as Half and Half walked inside with the quiet Weirdo and Katsuki scoffed, glaring after them. "Come on Bakugo, let's play," one of his friends exclaimed. He started to turn but stopped. He didn't get why Izuku was so special. He was just a quirkless nobody that would amount to nothing. Izuku, Toya and Arya walked onto the school grounds, the sun bathing them in morning warmth before they entered the building. They left Izuku with the principal before going to the empty classroom that they would be occupying for the rest of that year. "Arya-sensei?" Toya looked up from his English, meeting the eyes of the woman sitting on the desk next to him. She smiled at him softly, seeing if he needed any help. "What was it like? Going to school here?" She looked taken aback before fondly remembering her 3 years of high school. "It was exciting, we had a lot of fun and the class always seemed to be so full of life," she giggled softly, but when she saw that it wasn't enough of an answer, she continued. "After the sports festival, when Aizawa joined our class, that was when our friend group really formed. I guess I have Hitoshi to thank for that." Toya leaned on his hand, his English paper almost completely forgotten now. He listened to Arya's stories of her years in UA before she realized that they were wasting time and made him study history to catch up before lunch. There was a knock on the classroom door. Arya opened the door only to be greeted by a small boy and a white mammal next to him. "Izuku, Principal Nizu, is there a problem?" She crouched down, smiling at the small excitable boy before looking at Nizu. "I thought it would be good for Izuku to see how a high school classroom would work before we start with those courses." She looked shocked for a second before letting them inside. Toya helped Izuku into the desk next to him as Arya brought out the math book, making him groan and slamming his head into the desk. He hated math. But as it turns out, math was quite fun when he not only had Arya teach him but Izuku as well, who would often point out the mistakes he was making. Before long the bell rang to signify that lunch was starting. They help Arya pack up before making their way towards the faculty room to have lunch with the teachers. "Shokuen." Arya practically tackled the grumpy male who hadn't bothered to look up from his computer screen. "Arya-chan, when did you get here?" Hitoshi stood up to hug his friend. The old friend group hadn't seen each other in a very long time, even if they had been in the same school for 2 days now. They all had lunch together, most teachers being caught in the adorableness that was Izuku as the others talked to Toya about his studies and how it was to have such an obnoxiously loud teacher. Inko stood in front of the kitchen window. Dark clouds were making their way in. She sighed softly. The boys hadn't brought an umbrella with them but Meiguwa could lend them some. She rummaged through the cabinets and fridge before turning to the freezer. They were quickly running out of food, which wasn't weird since she housed 4 growing boys and often had pro-heroes stay for dinner. She quickly wrote down a list of things that she would be needing, grabbing her things and swung the door open only to be met the eyes of none other than All Might. Well, his tall but well-trained form with hair that hung in front of his face. "Yagi-san. I'm sorry, I almost hit you with the door." She gasped with a soft blush, but he just smiled at her, laughing softly. "No need to apologize, I was just about to ring the bell," she sighed softly as she gave him a small smile. "I would invite you in but I'm about to head out, the boys are eating me out of the house." They laughed, their laughter mingling as they made a soft melody. "Let me help, I came here because I wanted to talk to you anyway," he offered with a smile that could rival the sun, just like Izuku. "Oh, I couldn't possibly dash." "I insist." Their eyes met, and she could tell that he wouldn't relent, so she sighed and locked her front door. "All right, but then you'll have to help me carry." She knocked him lightly on the chest with her knuckles before making her way towards the farmer's market. He looked after her a bit shocked before hurrying after her with a smile and an unknown glint in his eyes. Footsteps echoed through the abandoned streets as the rain fell, drenching the young boy as he made his way forwards. He wasn't sure of where he was going, but he needed to get away from that place, to just keep running even if his lungs burned and his hair was glued to his forehead. He just needed to get away and everything would turn out okay. Inko and Yagi walked close together under the umbrella. Inko was carrying 3 bags as Yagi held 4 and the umbrella. She had tried to argue that she should carry 4 since he was holding the umbrella, but he had just laughed her off. Their arms brushed against each other ever so often. Inko could feel his warmth seep through her cardigan and she felt oddly content. She turned to look into one of the alleyways and she suddenly stopped, Yagi almost tripping as he tried to stop as abruptly as she did. "Midoriya-san." When he didn't get an answer, he followed her gaze. Against a wall sat a young boy. He must have been around Toya's age. His shoulder was shaking and he was drenched. He also wasn't wearing any shoes. Before Yagi could say anything, Inko made her way towards the boy. The boy's body was trembling as he took deep, ragged breath. His body was heavily sliding down the wall and his eyes was blurry from unshed tears. He looked down at his hands, scratched and badly scared after being broken so many times. He hadn't meant what he did, but he had no choice and did what he had to do in order to save the only person who looked at him like he wasn't a monster, a villain. He heard footsteps running towards him, but he was too tired. A blur of green passed his vision before he fell forward, a darkness spreading before his eyes as the whole world suddenly came to a stop. Surely, this was his end and he willingly embraced that darkness. Warmth, he was surrounded by warm sheets and he could feel the warmth of the sun on his feeble skin. He cracked his eyes open. The thing that entered his vision was white, almost as white as freshly fallen snow. He let them roam his surrounding, soon realizing he was in a private hospital room. How had he ended up here? He couldn't remember and he was honestly too weak to sit up. All the years of beatings and threats weighted down his body, making his mind muddle up with everything that happened these last few days. He wanted to hurt his father for those times he had put out his cigarettes on his skin, he wanted to yell at his mother for all the neglect, but most of all he wanted to die. He wanted to die for what he had done to his sister who had only shown kindness and love towards him. Tears formed in his eyes again and this time, he let them fall freely, to let them stain the tips of his hair and fall onto the unfamiliar pillow. Sadness filled his heart as he laid there, his whole body trembling and broken sobs escaped his chapped lips. Suddenly he felt a woman's hand on his forehead, making his eyes shot open. A lady with green hair and soft eyes was looking down at him. She was young and very pretty, but the look in her eyes felt so motherly that he just wanted to cling to her and cry his heart out. But he didn't dare touch her. She would get scarred by his hand or worse, fade into nothing, just like his sister did. The woman's hand slid through his hair, a thumb caressing underneath his eye as if to dry away the tears, something he wished his real mother would have done. His eyes soon drifted shut, feeling heavy from all the crying and the lack of sleep, and he soon fell into a dreamless sleep. Inko watched as the boy once again fell asleep, slowly removing her hand from his hair and stepping out to talk to one of the doctors. She had seen what the boy's quirk had done to the wall he was leaning on, yet she wasn't scared to reach out and help him, to hold him close so he wouldn't hurt himself as he fell. Any signs of him waking up? Yagi walked up to her as she walked past the waiting room, looking up at him with dazed eyes before blinking to snap out of it. Oh yes, he was awake for about 5 minutes before falling asleep again. Yagi nodded as he studied her. She was clearly lost in thought and he thought it rude to interrupt her. Did you reach Shoyuda? I want him to look after the kids whilst I'm here. Yagi nodded with a small smile, saying that Aizawa would be happy to take the kids, or that's what Kayama had said when she answered Aizawa's phone for him. Inko found the doctor that had done an exterior exam on the boy when they first came to the hospital. From what I can tell, these aren't facts until proven, but it seems as if his hands have been broken multiple times and gone untreated. He riffled through some papers on his clipboard as Inko stood quietly. Although, I can see gauze markings as if they have been tied onto strong for too long. It was unsettling to listen to. Inko almost felt like crying as she listened. The boy was clearly undernourished and the handprints around his neck was a clear sign of abuse. The doctors couldn't do much with the patient asleep, but earlier x-rays shows that he has no current broken bones or internal bleedings. A brain scan proved that he had no issues there and a blood test came back as clean. The boy was currently healthy in a medical term, meaning no illnesses or broken bones, and that was at least good. Now all they had to do was wait for the boy to wake up to hear his story and do the finishing exams. Arya, want to meet 2 more super adorable kids? Namuri asked as she entered the faculty room, Toya following close behind her, looking a little bit sour. I'd love to. She beamed, setting down the math book on her desk, looking over the half-empty faculty room. Toya plopped down on the sofa, leaning back with a satisfied smile. Hold on. Isn't All Might supposed to be here and train Toya? She asked as she looked around, only seeing Namuri and Power Loader. She went and knocked on the principal's door, hearing a bit off shuffling before the door slid open, Nizu standing there with questioning eyes. Have you seen All Might today? He's supposed to help Toya train, but he hasn't shown up. Just then, Nizu's office phone rings and they both look at it as if it would burst into flames. Nizu hurried over and answered. A grim look got upon his face as he talked that had Arya worried. It seems like Mrs. Midoriya found a child in need and he's staying with her until everything have been solved. She nodded and glanced over at Izuku, who was far too busy with his work to pay them any attention. But we can't let Toya's training get behind either, therefore it's up to you, Miss Winchester, huh? I'm sorry, but I think I misheard you. She blinks at him and he gives her that smile and she sigh, leaning against the door frame. You do realize I'm a rescue hero, I'm not like All Might. Yes, I am quite aware, but no hero should be a one-trick pony, it'll be a good change of pace. Come on Toya-chan, we have training to do. Arya stood in front of him, arms crossed under her chest as he opened his eyes to look at him. Lunch was just over and Izuku had run off to finish his work with Nizu. But, isn't All Might in charge of the training part? He tilts his head slightly, not sure what to think about this new development. He's busy, now hurry up. She gave him a soft smile that sent chills down his spine. He didn't dare to oppose her and got up, hurrying to the locker room to change into his uniform. Rescue Training 101 with Pro Hero Angel. Arya slapped the whiteboard, a thud echoing the room. I know that you and All Might have gone through a lot of different kinds of fighting styles as well as trained in different areas, but this time we're focusing on field rescuing. Arya turned towards the board and started to write down a few things, ruffling her wings closer to her body so Toya could see what she was writing. Now, you might think that your quirk isn't fit for something like this, and you're wrong. She turned to him, her hands on her hips. You'll have a try at field recurring, but we have a few things that we need to go through before we do so. Toya nodded slowly, leaning his head on his hand. You can't just run into the fray and start pulling. Panicking is a big no-no as well. It's important to have a leveled head and keen eyes. One wrong move and you can have a whole building fall over you and the people you're trying to save. If the people you're rescuing can sense or see that you're panicking, then they in turn will start panicking and can make the whole event more dangerous than it needs to be. Sensei, you said my quirk could be used for rescuing how? Excellent question, my good man. As your quirk is fire, it'll be essential for rescuing people at sea or in snowy biomes. I also think it'll become necessary for you to learn how to control your quirk so you can shapeshift it. Arya turned back to the board to draw a crude picture or a man, so she was apparently not good at art, Toya noted. What for? If Arya was turned towards him, he would have seen that she had rolled her eyes. For the kids, of course. If you could put on a show with your fire that would be distracting them long enough to get them out of a dangerous situation, but enough of this classroom, let's practice. Tenko slowly opened his eyes only to be met with the roof of the hospital. He let his hands run over the cover. It must be quirk canceling if his quirk didn't do anything to it. He let his eyes roam the room, noticing the same woman from before. She was leaning against a man with blonde hair and they seemed to be asleep. In their lap lay 3 children sleeping, one who clearly looked like the woman. You're awake. His red eyes snapped towards the voice, meeting with turquoise eyes that seemed to sparkle in the moonlight. The boy was wearing a soft smile and he looked so much like her, those kind eyes and that smile. It tore the small boy apart as tears formed in his eyes again. The red-haired boy looked worried and reached out for him, but Tenko pulled back, staring daggers at him. Don't touch me, he hissed as stinging tears rolled down his cheeks and the other boy slowly leaned back. Hey, it's okay, you're safe now. He spoke softly but Tenko only looked away from him. He didn't want to be reminded of her and those eyes, they didn't help. What's your name, kid? But Tenko had gone silent, his eyes on the door that lead out of the room he was currently in. The other must have mistaken what he was looking at as he soon spoke again. That's Midoriya Inko. She's the one who brought you here and the man she's leaning against is Yagi Toshinori, a family friend. Tenko didn't care to respond or even acknowledge that the boy was speaking to him. The child with green hair, he's Midoriya Izuku and the only one to be biologically related to Auntie Inko. Then there's Shudo who is my younger brother and we also have Midoriya Shinso, who is newly adopted into the Midoriya family. Tenko didn't understand why this boy was introducing everyone, as if he would know them for the rest of his life. And I'm Toya. Inko have yet another son called Aizawa Shoyuta, but he's not officially adopted yet. Tenko didn't know when, but sometime during the night he had fallen asleep again. Toya's voice had been droning on until he had lost consciousness. But when he woke up again, only Midoriya-san was there, sitting by his bedside as if she was watching over her own son, and he felt something grip his heart and squeeze. "Good morning, sweetie. Did you sleep well? Toya said that you woke up in the middle of the night. Did you have a bad dream?" He slowly shook his head, letting himself be swept away in her forest green eyes, who looked at him with a love he once saw in his mother's eyes, before he got his quirk. "That's good. Are you hungry? I had show you to leave some breakfast when he came to pick up the kids." She held out her hand and slowly a paper bag made it her way. Tenko couldn't help but to stare as the bag floated in the air before Midoriya-san gently took it. "We have some blueberry soup and a few different types of sandwiches, since we didn't know what you would like." She placed a few sandwiches on the table next to him, as well as a thermos that sounded full and most likely contained the blueberry soup. "What? Why are you so nice to me?" He finally got out and Midoriya-san looked at him as if he had said something funny, smiling at him. "Why isn't it obvious? I couldn't leave a child all by himself, especially when that child is in clear need of help." And Tenko couldn't find any lie to what she had said, her eyes shining brightly as the sun reflected in them. "Toya-chan, are you even listening? This will be on the test, you know." Arya huffed as she frowned at him, and he was clearly not paying attention as he only blinked at her. She leaned close to his face, making him snap out of his daydreaming and almost toppling backwards. "Seriously, it's almost like you don't want to learn," she'd said, looking slightly annoyed that her lessons weren't taken seriously. "I'm sorry, Arya-sensei, it's just..." Arya could see that something was bothering him and sat on top of the desk next to his, resting her hands in her lap. "Go on, tell me what's bothering you," she spoke gently, much like Auntie Inko does, and he unconsciously relaxed and leaned back in his chair. This boy," he started. He wasn't sure how to continue. "It's love." She looked at him with fake shock. "You're wrong," he retorted, blushing slightly. "Auntie Inko found this young child and he looks so much like Shudo did when we lived with Endeavor, scared and beaten, and his hands, God, his hands, you should have seen them, sensei." Arya quietly took in the information. The distress was oozing from her student's body. "He didn't let me touch him once he started to cry. I just wanted to comfort him, and when I couldn't I just felt so helpless." A gentle hand was placed on his back and he looked up into Arya's silver eyes. Emotions was swirling within them, but her face still held a smile and he felt calm, like he was safe with her next to him. So this was the power of a rescue hero. "I would like to meet this boy. It clearly means a lot to you." A knock startled Tenko from listening to the book that Midoriya-san was reading to him. It was a silly children's story, but it was better than to do nothing. Midoriya-san stood up and opened the door and he could see the red hair of Toya. His eyes fell back to Midoriya-san as she seemed to speak to someone just out of eyesight. "There is someone where who would like to see you, is that all right?" There was no alarm on Midoriya-san's face, so it was clearly safe, and he gave a small nod. Midoriya-san took her seat again and Toya sat by the window, looking at him with worried eyes but didn't say anything. Once he turned his eyes to the door once more, his eyes widened. In the door stood none other than pro-hero Angel. If his body wasn't in such pain, he would have shot straight up and run towards her. It would be a lie if he said that Angel was his favorite hero. "Angel." Shimura household. Shimura now speaking. A woman in her early 30s answered the phone. Her bangs are parted in the middle from her face and light brown hair in uneven waves that grow to her shoulders that she put behind her ear as she listens to the man on the other side speak. "Good evening, Mrs. Shimura. This is Officer Tamakawa Sansa speaking. We believe to have found your son, as the DNA tests matches your son's profile." Shimura now starred in front of her, her gaze seemingly unfocused and the phone slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. Her breathing became rough and uneven. She needed to steady herself. Where was Hana? Hana! She had seen her just the other day. Hana! 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 Shimura Kotoru came into the hallway to see what had fallen to the floor, seeing his wife curled into a ball and breathing heavily. The phone was laying on the floor and a concerned voice came through it. He picked it up, anger filling him against the person who sent his wife into a panic attack. "Who is this?" he demanded. "I'm Officer Tamakawa Sansa. I was speaking to Mrs. Shimura but then I heard a thud. Is she all right? Did she collapse? Should I send an ambulance?" "This is Mr. Shimura. What did you say to her?" Although he could hear the concern in the officer's voice, he was still heated. "I believe we found your son, Shimura Tenko." The phone gave away a small cracking sound as Kotoru gripped the phone harder. "I have no son, he died with my daughter." The call died before Tamakawa Sansa could say anything else. Something was clearly amiss, but he couldn't put his finger on what. He looked at the DNA result. They were a 99% match. The 1% was clearly the manifestation of the boy's quirk. "Tsukachi, can you come and take a look at this please?" His superior and friend came over to his desk, curious to why he was being called over. "What seems to be the matter?" Sansa explained what he just went through and told him about the suspicious way Mr. Shimura had acted when he mentioned his son's name. "That's weird indeed. Send me the files and recorded phone call. I need to make a call myself." The buzzing of Inko's phone paused the pleasant conversation. Ever since Arya had arrived, the boy had opened up enough to tell them that his name was Tenko, but not much else. "I'm sorry, I'll have to take this," she said once she saw who it was from. She exited the room and picked up the phone, hoping to get news about the Endeavor situation. "Tell me you have good news, Naomasa. If you're wondering about the Endeavor case, then not yet, but we have gotten a bit further on the child's case." Inko could hear tapping in the background, as he was doing research whilst talking to her. "His name is Shimura Tenko and his quirk has not been registered. Although the DNA test is a 99% match, Mr. Shimura claims that his son is dead." Inko's eyes widen, shocked and unsure what to think. "I was wondering, have you gotten any information from him? Something that could help?" Inko shook her head before she realized he couldn't see her. "No, he won't open up towards me, but he seems to put a lot of trust into Angel." "The pro hero? How many do you know?" He half joked before becoming serious again. "I believe that if we got him into a more comfortable space, he might be willing to open up a bit more." "That is a possibility. Would it be all right as I spoke to Angel for a bit?" "Angel, Detective Tsukachi would like to speak to you." Inko handed Arya the phone. Tenko looked like he wanted to reach out when she got up, and she gave him a kind smile. "I'll be right back, 5 minutes." Tenko reluctantly nodded, watching as she left the room. "Angel speaking." She leaned against the glass, just to make sure that Tenko could still see her. "Hello, Angel. My name is Tsukachi Naomasa. I would like to speak with you about Shimura Tenko." "What about him?" She tilted her head in question, listening to Tsukachi as he droned on about their current case and everything that had happened up until now. "I've also heard that he is quite taken by you. Seems he trusts you more than anyone currently. He's such a sweet boy, it's hard not to care for him. I have a proposal for you. As his current family is denying his existence, he won't have anywhere to go. I would normally ask Inko to take him, but since he seems to trust you, would it be too much to ask if you took him in? Just until everything has been sorted out." Arya wasn't sure if she heard him right, letting his sentence roll around before it finally settled. "All right. How'd it go?" Inko asked as Arya handed her phone back. A conflicted look was upon Arya's face. "Would it be all right if I spoke to Tenko alone?" She spoke softly, as if her voice would break if she spoke any louder. Inko gave a small nod and led the other kids outside. Once the door was closed, Arya took a seat on the bed again, looking at the small boy in front of her. "Tenko, I want to be completely honest with you." He looked at her with big eyes, nodding his head slowly. "Your mom and dad claim that you're dead and therefore you can't go back there." She rubs the back of her neck. Confrontation wasn't her strong point. "Detective Tsukachi said that, once you're discharged from the hospital, if you want, you can live with me." She smiled softly at him, trying to read his reaction. Although she grew up with 2 younger brothers, it was still hard to read Tenko's emotions. He stared at his hands, his mind running a mile a minute. The people he once thought as family had abandoned him, and the only person who loved him was dead. He jumped back as he felt soft fingers brush hair out of his face. Angel smiled at him. It was such a kind smile. one he had longed for to get from his own mother ever since his quirk manifested. Those silver eyes held so many emotions, but no matter how much he looked, he couldn't find any hate or fear in them. Was he truly allowed to live on happily? After all that he has done, would that really be alright? He wanted to reach out for her, to hug her tightly and never let go. Maybe he could get another chance if Angel was by his side. Those soft hands glided through his unkempt hair and he leaned into them. Was this how it felt to be loved? To be safe? He's only felt this before his quirk ruined his life, but even those was just vague memories. Can I really stay with you? His voice was small, on the point of breaking. He fought to keep his tears back, but when he saw her joyful smile they wouldn't stop falling. Of course you can. Angel wiped his tears away, held his cheeks as if he was the most precious person in the world. He wanted to hug her but the fear of touching her was far greater. I need to call Detective Tsukachi. A small sniffle could be heard as she discreetly tried to wipe away her own tears. She wasn't particularly good at hiding it, but it made Tenko smile. Midoriya-san and Toya entered once Angel had left the room to call the detective. He could tell that Toya looked relieved. They had probably looked from behind the window. It's good to see you smile, Midoriya-san said as she sat down on her chair, fishing out a few sandwiches from her bag and handed them to the boys. Tenko blushed slightly but accepted the sandwich anyways. It felt like he hadn't eaten in years. Seems like letting your emotions out really drained you. So, what now? Toya asked as he took a big bite out of his sandwich, chewing slowly as he looked at Midoriya-san. It seems like Tenko will be living with Angel once he gets out of the hospital. Midoriya-san smiled as she placed a cup of water on the table next to Tenko's bed. Toya looked over to Tenko as if to confirm it, and he only nodded. Awesome, I heard her family is super rich, so her place must be awesome. Toya spoke around his sandwich, which earned him a glare from Midoriya-san. That doesn't matter, as long as Tenko grows up in a healthy environment, that's all that matters. Toya sent her a cheeky grin before going back to eating. Tenko could honestly care less about if Arya had money or not. As long as she looked at him with those eyes, there would be nothing that could beat that. Slowly, with shaky hands he took a bite out of the sandwich and felt the flavors explode in his mouth. It was the best he had eaten so far. Do you think that the boy that Mom found is doing all right? All three of them were at the kindergarten today. The only one that had gone to UA was Toya, who would have to take Izuku's scheduled classes since Arya was at the hospital. He did look really bad, Hitoshi said under his breath. They all sat under a tree in the backyard. Luckily Bakugo was leaving them alone after the incident with Shudo, even if Izuku still didn't know what had happened. He has bad parents. The two boys looked at Shudo, who was showing a painful expression, and Izuku understood. He had been there when Shudo and Toyanai had first arrived at their house. He leaned over and squeezed Shudo's hand, making the other look up at him and give him a sad smile. Oh. Hitoshi thought back to his time at the orphanage and cringed, making Izuku take his hand as well, holding them tightly in his small hands. It's okay now, with Mom here, nothing can go wrong. Izuku smiled, that infectious smile that seemed to be able to pull the other two out of their wandering minds. They sat there for the rest of the day. The only time they got up was to eat lunch or use the bathroom, but other than that, nothing could make them move. When the sun started to set, Shoyuta came to pick them up with Toya, who had just left the hospital. Tanai, is the boy all right? Shudo asked as soon as he spotted his older brother, who in turn knelt to be eye level with the small children. He's doing a lot better. His name is Tenko and it has been decided that once he gets out of the hospital he'll be living with Arya-sensei. Toya ruffled Shudo's hair before picking up him and Izuku, carrying them on each arm. Shoyuta rolled his eyes at the teen's blatant show-off and picked up Hitoshi, placing him securely in his arms. Oh, and he's actually around my age. Toya smiled sadly. He looked so small, clear signs of malnutrition. Shudo and Izuku looked at him with big eyes, as if to say that they didn't believe him, making him laugh out loud. Izuku, I've got your homework from Nizu-sensei. Toya fished it out of his backpack once they had gotten home. Since Inko would be home later, it was Toya's job to look after the kids. After a bit of begging from the children, Shoyuta decided to stay as well. It wasn't like he was in a hurry anyways. They crowed around the dining table as Toya went to get them some snacks, since food would help the brain, or that was what he claimed anyways. They sat there for hours and maybe a third of that time, they were actually studying. At first, Shoyuta tried to make them focus on their work, but he was soon swept up in it all, finding it rather relaxing and enjoyable to spend time with them. He guessed that he should get used to it. After all, he would soon be welcomed into the Midoriya household and gain 2 younger brothers. No, I'm telling you it's true. I'm never gonna let Natsuo live that down. Toya laughed as he finished his story, the whole table giggling, while Shoyuta was just softly smiling, but he counted that as a win. I'm home. The front door suddenly opened and Inko's voice rang out. A lot of shuffling could be heard in the hallway before she emerged in the kitchen. Welcome home, a choir of voice rang out, but no one making the effort to go to the front door to greet her. Well, isn't this a pleasant surprise? Are you guys helping each other with your homework? Inko sent Shoyuta a knowing smile. After all, she had heard them laughing even before she had opened the door. Toya rubbed the back of his neck, not looking her in the eyes, making her giggle softly. Well, you better finish soon because I'm going to start dinner now. This made the boys snap out of their prolonged break and go back to their homework. Shoyuta got up to offer to help her, since he was the only one that didn't have any work to do. Dinner went by smoothly. It was filled with laughter and pea flicking. It might have made a mess, but this was the most comfortable she had seen the boys since they all had come here, so she let them be to just enjoy the moment they are currently in. Natsu, have you packed everything? Fuyumi poked her head inside her brother's room, watching him stuff his backpack with as much stuff as he could. I'm trying, but it's hard to stuff an entire room into one backpack. He grunts as he presses a shirt into the already overstuffed bag. I told you to only pack the essentials, not your entire room, she sighs as she watches him struggle, watching the bag that is about to burst. Once this whole ordeal is over, we can get the stuff we left here. Right now we only need the most important things. Natsuo looked over at her with a pout before nodding, beginning to unpack his bag in order to repack it. Endeavor wouldn't be home until late today, which made this the perfect time to sneak out. Fuyumi strutted into the living room and started to rummage through the drawers and cabinets of bookshelves, looking for an incredibly special thing. After a bit of looking, she finally found it. It was an old album filled with happy memories and no pictures of him. She hugged it close to her chest before she hurried back to her room, gently packing it into her bag. Ready? Natsuo nodded and they grabbed each other's hands, taking a deep breath as they opened the front door and left the old traditional Japanese house behind. They struggled a bit with the front gate but eventually pushed it open, stepping out on the curb, not seeing anyone as they set their pace towards Inko's house. Are you sure we're going the right way? Natsuo sighed. He was sitting on a bench in a park as Fuyumi tried to look through a map. If she had had her phone, things would have been easier, but Endeavor had taken both their phones the night Toya and Shudo ran away. Maybe everything just looks the same. She frowned as she studied the map. Orientation wasn't her strong suit. Excuse me, do you need any help? Fuyumi looked up only to meet eyes with a woman. She had long dark purple hair and sky blue eyes. Well, we're looking for our aunt's house, Fuyumi mumbled, not sure who to trust. They could after all be working for Endeavor. What's her name? I could find her street and take you there. The lady smiled kindly towards them, kneeling down to be at their eye level. Fuyumi and Natsuo changed glances before Fuyumi spoke up. They could always run, even if they would get more lost. Midoriya Inko. The woman's eyes widened before she gave them a bright smile. You know Inko? I was just on my way there to look after her children. The lady clapped her hands in excitement. Hearing the lady speak about their aunt in such a friendly manner really calmed them down. Come on, I'll take you there. Oh, and I'm Kiyama Nimuri. The lady, Kiyama, held each their hand as they walked, soon reaching a quiet neighborhood that Fuyumi somewhat recognized. We're here. I'm sure Inko will be happy to see you again. All they did was nodded. The whole walk there they had been listening to her talk. She led them towards the door and rang the doorbell. There was a bit of shuffling behind the door before it was flung open. Before they stood a boy with green hair and eyes. Nemi! The small boy exclaimed before his eyes landed on the other two, a look of confusion coming upon his face. Izuku, who's at the door? Inko came into the hallway, smiling as she saw Kiyama before her eyes landed on Fuyumi and Natsuo, her hands covering her mouth as she gasped. Oh dear, Tia Shuto. The panicked shout made the two boys hurry into the hallway, following her line of sight before gasping as well. Toya, Shuto, the two middle siblings felt tears form in their eyes as they hurried over to their siblings, throwing themselves at the others. A small pile of siblings had been created, all of them sobbing and hugging, no one of them being able to create any coherent words. Izuku stood by his mother's side, patting her leg as she sobbed into her hands, not sure what was going on but supported his mother nonetheless. Once everything calmed down and everyone had moved into the living room, clutching a cup of hot chocolate which Shoyuta had made, the talk started. Fumi told them everything that had happened after the two had left, tears sometimes falling down, which Toya wiped away with his thumb. "I'm so glad you're here now, you're safe now," Inko sniffed as she wiped her eyes, smiling softly at the two newcomers. "As you might have guessed, this is my son Izuku, and this is my other son Hitoshi." She placed her hands on the two boys' back. "Hitoshi, Izuku, these two are Fumi and Natsuo, Toya's and Shuto's siblings." Izuku waved at them and Hitoshi hid behind Inko. "Namuri, you've already met, and the man over there is Shoyuta. They are both pro-heroes. Shutenai is also family." Izuku cheered, making Shoyuta blush and look away. This day has been full of emotions. Inko sipped on her tea. She had finally gotten everyone to bed. Shuto, Izuku, and Hitoshi were sharing Izuku's bed, and Toya, Fumi, and Natsuo were sleeping in her bed. "I've heard, so the boy in the hospital will be in Arya's care?" Namuri blew on her tea before taking a sip. She was on night watch since Shoyuta had an early shift tomorrow. "Yes, I think that's for the best. Not only does he seem to trust her the most, I don't have any more room." Namuri nodded. Their house wasn't large, even if it was 2 stories high. "Maybe it's time to move." "Hi there, friends. I'm very happy with the fact that so many of you seem to like this story, and some of you might even wait for this to continue, even if it's been 4 years. Well, I got bad news and I got good news. Bad news, I will no longer be updating this story. Good news, I'll be rewriting it instead. Reason, I started this story in May 2019, which is over 5 years ago, and feel like both my writing style and creativity have developed. Can't say much for my spelling. 4 months now I've been thinking if I should rewrite this series, as it still gets a bit of attention now and then, but I haven't updated it since, so, with fresh ideas and some determination, I will be rewriting the story. But don't be alarmed, I will keep this story up for now. So, look forward to the new series called Side by Side with You.